The December wind cut through downtown Atlanta like a knife, sending newspapers tumbling down Marietta Street as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the towering buildings. Outside the State Farm Arena, the usual post-game crowd had long since dispersed, leaving only a few scattered fans hoping for one last glimpse of their basketball heroes. Among them stood Keisha Williams, a 12-year-old girl whose determination burned brighter than the streetlights illuminating the empty plaza. Her thin jacket, a hand-me-down from her older cousin, offered little protection against the bitter cold that had settled over the city. She pulled her knit hat lower over her ears, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air, as she stamped her feet to keep the circulation going. "Keisha, baby, we need to go," her grandmother, Dorothy Williams, called out from the bus stop across the street. At 72, Dorothy's arthritis made the cold even more unbearable, but she had promised her granddaughter this one chance to see her idol. "The last bus home leaves in 20 minutes. Just a little longer, Grandma," Keisha pleaded, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I know he's still in there. I can feel it." Dorothy shook her head with a mixture of concern and admiration. This child had saved every penny from her allowance and odd jobs around their East Atlanta neighborhood for months, just to buy 2 tickets to tonight's game. Not courtside seats. Those were far beyond their means. But nosebleed section tickets that still cost more than Dorothy spent on groceries in 2 weeks. The game had been everything Keisha had dreamed of. Watching Shaquille O'Neal, even in his later years, dominate the court with his presence had filled her with an indescribable joy. She had cheered until her voice was hoarse, jumped until her legs ached, and clapped until her palms were red and stinging. But seeing him from hundreds of feet away wasn't enough. She needed to see him up close, to tell him how much he meant to her, how his story of rising from poverty had given her hope. A security guard approached, his heavy boots echoing against the concrete. "Miss, the arena's closing down. Players left through the back exit about an hour ago." Keisha's heart sank, but she didn't move. "Are you sure? All of them?" The guard, a middle-aged black man named Marcus who had daughters of his own, softened his tone. "Pretty sure, sweetheart. It's getting dangerous out here for a young lady. Like yourself, this cold can sneak up on you." As if to prove his point, Keisha's teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to conserve what little body heat she had left. Her fingers, exposed in her threadbare gloves, had begun to lose feeling. Dorothy hurried across the street, her own joints protesting with each step. "Come on, honey. We'll try again another time." But Keisha knew there wouldn't be another time. This was likely her only chance. Her grandmother had worked double shifts at the hotel laundry service for 3 months to help pay for tonight. They couldn't afford another game, another chance, another dream. 5 more minutes, Keisha whispered, though she could barely feel her lips moving. "Please, just 5 more minutes." The wind picked up again, sending a chill through her entire body that made her shiver so violently she could barely stand. But still, she waited. In her mind, she rehearsed what she would say if she got the chance. "Mr. O'Neal, you're my hero. Not just because you're amazing at basketball, but because you never forgot where you came from. You give me hope that I can make it out of here too." As the minutes ticked by and the temperature continued to drop, Keisha's unwavering faith was about to be tested in ways she never imagined. But sometimes the universe has a way of rewarding those who refuse to give up, even when all hope seems lost. The black SUV pulled around to the front of the arena just as Keisha's grandmother was making one final plea for them to leave. Its tinted windows reflected the orange glow of the street lamps, and its engine purred quietly in the night air. Most people wouldn't have paid it much attention. Expensive cars weren't uncommon around the arena, but something made Keisha look up. Her heart began to race as the vehicle slowed down directly in front of where she stood. Through her chattering teeth, she managed to whisper, "Grandma, what if—" The driver's side door opened first, and a tall man in a suit stepped out. Keisha recognized him as part of the team's security detail from the game program she'd studied cover to cover. But it was the passenger side that made her breath catch in her throat. The door opened, and a size 23 shoe touched the pavement, followed by another. Slowly, deliberately, Shaquille O'Neal emerged from the vehicle, his massive frame seeming to block out half the streetlight. At 7'1" and 325 pounds, he was even more imposing in person than he appeared on television. His presence commanded attention, but it was his eyes that Keisha noticed first. Warm, intelligent, and now focused directly on her. "Excuse me, young lady." His deep voice carried easily across the plaza. "You've been out here for a while, haven't you?" Keisha tried to respond, but the combination of cold and shock had rendered her temporarily speechless. She managed a small nod, her entire body trembling now from more than just the December chill. Shaq took a step closer, his security detail hanging back but staying alert. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Keisha," she finally managed to stutter out. "Keisha Williams." "Well, Miss Keisha Williams, what are you doing out here in this cold? Don't you know it's dangerous for a young person to be out here alone at this hour?" Dorothy stepped forward, protective instincts overriding her awe at meeting the basketball legend. "She's not alone, sir. I'm her grandmother. She's been waiting to see you. Been saving up for months just to come to this game." Shaq's expression softened even further as he looked between the elderly woman and the shivering girl. He could see the love between them, the sacrifice, the determination. It reminded him of his own childhood, of his mother working multiple jobs, of nights when heating bills meant choosing between warmth and food. "How long have you been out here, Keisha?" he asked gently. "About 3 hours," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 hours, in freezing weather, just for a chance to see him. Shaq felt something stir in his chest, a familiar ache that came whenever he encountered the kind of pure, unwavering dedication that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with basketball in the first place. This wasn't about autographs or selfies or social media posts. This was about something deeper, something real. He looked at Keisha more carefully now, taking in her thin jacket, her worn sneakers, the way she kept shifting from foot to stay warm. He saw himself at her age, determined, hopeful, and deserving of so much more than circumstances had initially offered. "Tell me something, Keisha," he said, kneeling down so he could be closer to her eye level, though he was still enormous compared to her small frame. "What's your favorite thing about basketball?" The question seemed to unlock something in Keisha. Despite her chattering teeth, her eyes lit up. "It's not just the game, Mr. O'Neal. It's what you do off the court, too. How you help kids, how you remember what it was like to struggle. My teacher told us about your foundation, about how you pay for kids' education. That's what I want to do someday. Help other kids like me." Shaq felt his heart swell. This wasn't just a fan meeting her idol. This was a young person with dreams, with plans, with the same fire that had driven him from poverty to greatness. And she was standing in freezing weather, risking her health, just for a moment of connection. He stood up, slowly, his mind racing. This moment called for more than just an autograph or a quick photo. This called for something that would change everything. "Keisha," he said, his voice taking on a tone that made both her and Dorothy pay closer attention. "I think you and I need to have a real conversation. But not out here in this cold." What happened next would be talked about for years to come, shared across social media platforms, and remembered as one of those rare moments when a celebrity's true character shines through the glitz and glamour of fame. Shaq turned to his security detail. "Marcus, can you start up the heat in the car?" Then, looking back at Keisha and Dorothy, he made an offer that neither of them saw coming. "Ladies, would you do me the honor of joining me for a warm meal? I know a place nearby that stays open late, and I think we all could use some hot food and conversation." Dorothy's eyes widened. "Mr. O'Neal, we couldn't possibly—" "Please," Shaq interrupted gently. "Call me Shaq. And yes, you absolutely can. In fact, you'd be doing me a favor. After games like tonight, I usually end up eating alone in some hotel room. It would be nice to have some real company for once." He gestured toward his SUV, where the engine was now running and warm air was beginning to circulate. "Besides, I can't in good conscience let a young lady who's been standing in the cold for 3 hours just to see me go home without at least making sure she's properly warmed up. Keisha looked up at her grandmother, her eyes pleading. This was beyond her wildest dreams. Not only had she met her hero, but he was inviting them to spend more time with him. Dorothy, despite her practical nature, could see the pure joy radiating from her granddaughter's face. "If you're certain it's no trouble," Dorothy said carefully. "No trouble at all," Shaq assured her, opening the car door. "In fact, it's exactly what I needed tonight." As they settled into the luxurious interior of the SUV, Keisha couldn't help but stare around in wonder. The leather seats were heated. There were small screens embedded in the back of the front seats, and the entire cabin was blissfully warm. But what struck her most was how normal Shaq seemed despite the extraordinary circumstances. "So, Keisha," he said as they pulled away from the arena, "tell me about school. What's your favorite subject?" "Math and English," she replied, beginning to thaw both physically and emotionally. "I want to study business in college so I can start my own foundation someday." "Smart girl," Shaq nodded approvingly. "You know, starting a foundation is exactly how I began making a real difference. Basketball opened doors for me, but it's what you do with those opportunities that really matters." They drove through downtown Atlanta, the city lights painting colorful streaks across the car windows. Shaq directed his driver to Pascal's, a legendary soul food restaurant that had been serving the community for decades. It was the kind of place where conversations mattered more than celebrity status, where food was prepared with love, and where stories were shared across generations. "This place has been here since before I was born," Shaq explained as they pulled up to the modest brick building. "Some of the best food in Atlanta, and they treat everyone like family." Inside the restaurant, the warmth enveloped them immediately. The owner, Mrs. Paschal, greeted Shaq like an old friend, but her attention quickly turned to Keisha and Dorothy, making them feel just as welcome. The late hour meant they had the restaurant mostly to themselves, creating an intimate atmosphere perfect for meaningful conversation. As they settled into a corner booth, Keisha finally felt brave enough to ask the question that had been burning in her heart all evening. "Shaq, can I tell you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Keisha took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "My dad left when I was little, and my mom works 2 jobs just to pay rent. Sometimes I feel like I'm never going to make it out of our neighborhood, like I'm going to be stuck forever. But watching you play, reading about your life, it gives me hope that maybe I can be something more." The restaurant fell silent except for the soft jazz playing in the background. Shaq leaned forward, his full attention focused on this brave young girl who had just shared her deepest fears and dreams with him. "Keisha," he said softly, "let me tell you something that I want you to never forget." The fluorescent lights of Pascal's cast a warm glow over the table as Shaq leaned back in his chair, his massive frame somehow managing to look comfortable in the modest restaurant booth. He had listened intently as Keisha shared more of her story, how she tutored younger kids in her apartment complex for pocket change, how she dreamed of attending Georgia Tech or Emory University, how she sometimes went to bed hungry so her grandmother could afford her medications. "You know what I see when I look at you, Keisha?" Shaq said, his voice carrying the weight of lived experience. "I see myself at your age. Same determination, same dreams, same refusal to let circumstances define your future." He paused, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out his phone. "I'm going to tell you something that I don't share often. When I was growing up, there were nights when my mom worked so many jobs she'd fall asleep standing up. There were times when we had to choose between paying for heat or buying groceries. But you know what my mother always told me?" Keisha shook her head, hanging on every word. She said, "Shaquille, your current situation is not your final destination." That phrase changed my life, and I want it to change yours too. Dorothy wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her granddaughter absorb these words from someone who had walked a similar path. Shaq continued, "But here's the thing, Keisha. I didn't make it out alone. People helped me along the way. Teachers, coaches, community members who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. And now it's my turn to be that person for someone else." He set his phone on the table and looked directly into Keisha's eyes. "I want to make you a promise tonight, and I want you to know that when Shaquille O'Neal makes a promise, he keeps it." The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as Keisha waited for what would come next. "I'm going to personally ensure that you get the education you deserve. Full scholarship, tuition, books, housing, everything. But there's one condition." Keisha's heart raced. "What condition?" "You have to promise me that once you achieve your dreams, you'll reach back and help another young person who's standing where you are right now. You'll be the person for someone else that I'm trying to be for you tonight." The silence that followed was profound. Dorothy reached over and squeezed her granddaughter's hand, tears streaming down her face. Keisha stared at Shaq in disbelief, trying to process what had just happened. You're serious?" she whispered. "Dead serious," Shaq replied. "But I need more than just your word. I need to know that you understand the responsibility that comes with this opportunity." Keisha straightened in her chair, her voice gaining strength. "Mr. O'Neal, Shaq, I promise you that I will work harder than I've ever worked in my life. I'll make the grades, I'll graduate, and I'll spend the rest of my life helping other kids who need someone to believe in them." Shaq smiled, the kind of genuine smile that transforms a person's entire face. "I believe you, Keisha. In fact, I'm counting on it." He picked up his phone and began typing. "I'm sending a message to my foundation director right now. Tomorrow morning, someone from my team will contact you to begin the scholarship process. We'll also set up tutoring, mentorship, and internship opportunities to make sure you're fully prepared for college." As if the evening couldn't get more surreal, Shaq wasn't finished. "And one more thing," he said, reaching into his other pocket and pulling out his wallet. He extracted several bills and handed them to Dorothy. "For heat, groceries, whatever you need. No one should have to choose between staying warm and eating." Dorothy tried to protest, but Shaq held up his hand. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this isn't charity. This is an investment. I'm investing in Keisha's future, and that means making sure she has everything she needs to succeed right now." As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Shaq had one final surprise. "Keisha, I want you to have something." He pulled off the championship ring he was wearing, not one of his NBA rings, but a special ring commemorating his foundation's work with underprivileged youth. "This ring represents something more important than any basketball achievement," he explained, as he placed it in her small hands. "It represents the power of giving back, of lifting others up, of never forgetting where you came from. I want you to wear it as a reminder of tonight, and of the promise we made to each other." 6 months later, Keisha Williams was featured on the local news as the recipient of the Shaquille O'Neal Foundation's full academic scholarship. She was also the youngest volunteer in the foundation's history, already tutoring children in her neighborhood and organizing basketball camps for kids who couldn't afford expensive programs. The interview ended with a question about that cold December night when everything changed. "What would you say to other kids who feel like their dreams are impossible?" the reporter asked. Keisha, now confident and articulate, smiled as she adjusted the special ring on her finger. "I'd tell them that sometimes miracles come disguised as regular people who choose to do extraordinary things, and I'd tell them to never give up, because you never know who might be watching, ready to change your life forever." The story of that night became legendary in Atlanta and beyond, not just because a famous athlete helped a young fan, but because it demonstrated the profound impact that occurs when someone with resources chooses to see the potential in another human being and acts on it. Years later, when Dr. Keisha Williams established her own foundation for underprivileged youth, she would always begin her speeches the same way. "Let me tell you about a cold December night when I learned that sometimes all it takes is someone willing to see your worth and invest in your future." And in the audience, whenever possible, would be Shaquille O'Neal, beaming with pride at the remarkable woman that brave little girl had become, knowing that the real victory wasn't any basketball game. It was the moment he chose to stop and truly see another human being's potential, transforming not just her life, but his own understanding of what it means to be truly successful.